government in Switzerland. So before giving the floor to the former president of Portugal, who was also a host in this house for many years, let me just present the members of the Global Commission on Drugs Policy. Here on this stage, let me present Anand Grover. He is the former UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health and Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India, and he is representing Asia. Louise Arbour, former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Canada, representing North America. Fernando Henrique Cardoso, former President of Brazil and former Chair of the Global Commission, representing Latin America. Helen Clark, former Prime Minister of New Zealand and Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, representing the Pacific, and Olusegun Obasanjo, former President of Nigeria, representing Africa. In the first rank, in the first row, there are the other commissioners that have come to Lisbon. From France, Michel Kazachkin, former Executive Director of the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria from France. Juan Manuel Santos, former President of Colombia, Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Ernesto Zedillo, former President of Mexico. Ricardo Lagos, former President of Chile. From Egypt, I am not sure if he is here, Mohamed El Baradei, who was Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency and Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Galema Motlanthe, former President of South Africa. From Switzerland, Maria Katawi, former Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce. And as a special guest, Pedro Pires, former President of Cabo Verde. This event is being live streamed, so we are also joined by an audience from all over the world, and I give now the floor to President Sampaio.
Disseram-me que havia tradução, onde é que está? Como é que eu vou empurrar? Senhoras embaixadores, senhores membros da Comissão, representantes da municipalidade, minhas senhoras e meus senhores. Good afternoon, everyone. The reason why I asked for the possibility of using the translations, as you may understand, I'm going to speak in Portuguese. I know that you are all familiar with this language, but nevertheless, it's good to have a translation. Quero saudar todos os presentes e agradecer à Câmara de Lisboa por ter anuído em ser a anfitriã. I know there's always a problem, so I wait. Em ser a anfitriã desta sessão. Para além do significado que reveste o facto de, desta forma, a autarquia se associar aos trabalhos da Global Commission on Drug Policy, e que naturalmente quero saudar por todas as razões, espero que esta colaboração não se esgote nesta sessão e que possamos encetar uma colaboração mais próxima e de longo prazo que nos permita prosseguir no caminho das reformas sempre necessárias da política pública de drogas, a qual, a meu ver, não pode nunca dispensar um envolvimento forte das entidades locais. Quero também aproveitar a ocasião para renovar os meus sinceros agradecimentos à Presidente da Global Commission, Madame Ruth Dreifuss, antiga Presidente da Confederação Helvética e antiga Ministra da Saúde, bem como a todos os comissários por terem decidido organizar a nossa sessão plenária em Lisboa. Neste gesto, vejo não só o reconhecimento público do papel pioneiro que Portugal tem desempenhado nesta área, mas também um sinal de encorajamento e estímulo para continuarmos na senda das reformas. Nesta área, como em tantas outras, nunca nada está adquirido com caráter definitivo, para além de que a evolução tem sido tão rápida que exige aprofundamentos continuados. Como ontem se sublinhava no encontro que teve lugar com a sociedade civil, organizado pelo GATT e que quero de novo aqui agradecer, nos últimos 10 anos mudou tudo, do consumo aos consumidores, da produção, distribuição e tráfico de drogas aos traficantes. E, no entanto, o que não mudou, ou mudou muito pouco, é o reconhecimento do falhanço da abordagem da guerra à droga, a perspectiva proibicionista e o facto punitivo. Ora, é sabido este paradigma não funciona e há que desenvolver políticas novas, assentes em dados e em evidência científica, moldadas por uma visão forte dos direitos humanos, que coloquem as pessoas no centro e lhes proporcionem a assistência e os serviços de saúde e sociais que necessitem para assumir a sua plena cidadania. Minhas senhoras e meus senhores, a Global Commission on Drug Policy, criada em 2011, dedica-se à promoção da reforma das políticas de droga. Hoje a Comissão é considerada uma referência mundial nesta área, tendo conseguido derrubar o mito de que a proibição funciona. Os seus relatórios anuais passaram a ser também uma referência mundial, tendo de ano em ano focado aspectos sempre diferentes, mas complementares, das razões por que uma reforma da política de drogas é necessária e urgente. Hoje a Comissão vai lançar o seu relatório de 2018 e que denuncia o impacto negativo do sistema vigente de classificação de substâncias psicoativas, construído em bases, entretanto, caducas, ao arrepio dos dados científicos mais atuais. Mas fico-me por aqui, deixando a sua apresentação aos meus colegas. Muito obrigado pela vossa presença e espero que a sessão vos possa ser útil. Muito obrigado a todos.
Good evening, everybody, and from me, welcome also to the launch of the new report. Two mics? One mic's enough, thank you. So, welcome to the launch of our report on the classification of psychoactive substances when science was left behind. And each of us have aspects of the report and the background to it to talk about. But to underline at the beginning, the Global Commission on Drug Policy stands against prohibition. It stands for decriminalization and legal regulation of drugs. At the heart of the prohibition approach globally are the UN Drug Conventions, the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs and the 1971 Convention on Psychotropic Substances. Now, the scheduling and classification of drugs, which this report addresses, are carried out under those conventions. And the decisions on what and how to classify and schedule are actually political decisions right now taken by UN member states at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. It's the hypothesis of this report that this system is a broken system and that it treats scheduling and classification in a very biased and inconsistent way, and has from the outset of the 1961 Convention. It's our view that decisions about drugs should be taken based on what is a rational scale of harms and benefits. As we know, and as you appreciate so well in Portugal, as a matter of national policy, prohibition has never stopped either drug supply or consumption. It actually forces supply through criminal organisations with all the ramifications of that for people. That was the case, actually, when some countries attempted to prohibit the consumption of alcohol, and continues to be the case with drugs prohibited pursuant to the conventions. What I think is one of the most dramatic graphs in our report is this one. And it shows a scale, a weighted scale for the harms of drugs. Now, perhaps the lay person not conversant with this subject might think, oh, what is this one that reaches, almost off the page? They might be thinking, is it heroin? Is it opium? Is it methamphetamine? Ladies and gentlemen, it is alcohol. But alcohol is not scheduled under the 1961 Convention, nor, by the way, do we think it should be. But why do we take such a different approach when clearly it is not based on potential harms? So my role then was just to talk a little about how this broken system came about. It has had, from the beginning, a bias towards prohibiting new substances, perhaps because the political decision makers fear negative consequences of being more lenient with a drug that turns out to be more harmful, whereas the negative consequences to decision makers to date of keeping a drug that is actually harmless off the market are minimal. Interestingly, the inclusion in 1961 of cannabis and coca leaf on the schedules was done without any proper review process by the World Health Organization at all. We find that recommendations to add new substances are often just rubber stamped, but when a recommendation will come through not to schedule a drug, and there's current issues around ketamine and tramadol, these recommendations not to schedule are consistently confronted with very significant opposition. Now, from the time of the 61 Convention, the distinctions between what is legal and what is deemed illegal are largely based on historical and cultural precedents and distorted by morally charged perceptions. Some things are just seen as okay, other things are deemed to be bad. And so the whole thrust of this report is the urgent need to base the way we classify and regulate drugs on a rational, evidence-based scale of the relevant harms and benefits. And the Global Commission's purpose in issuing this report is to bring a science-based discussion to drug policy, which has been rather hard when so much of it has been based on views of morality. And we believe that the current classification system is a broken one and a major obstacle to rational and evidence-based drug policy. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. May I ask the permission to the chair? in order to speak in Portuguese, since the President of Portugal has used the privilege of speaking in Portuguese, I will try to imitate him. É um prazer estar aqui mais uma vez em Lisboa e participar, como tenho participado desde a fundação, dessa comissão que se ocupa da questão da política das drogas. O primeiro fato que eu queria ressaltar é que aqui há um conjunto grande de ex-mandatários, alguns bem recentes. E isso significa que, pelo menos para alguns, a experiência do poder serviu para mostrar que a guerra às drogas foi inútil. Quando eu exercia a presidência do Brasil, mandei erradicar muitas plantações de maconha. Era só maconha. Mas não erradicamos nunca realmente o uso da maconha. E se nós olharmos para a América Latina, que é a minha região, e aqui há pessoas que têm mais autoridade para falar sobre a questão, o presidente da Colômbia, que está aqui, Juan Manuel Santos, e outros mais que têm autoridade, Zedillo, que aqui está, que foi cofundador conosco dessa comissão, junto com Gaviria e muitos outros. Se nós formos olhar para o que acontece na nossa região da América Latina, nós vamos ver que os esforços despendidos na guerra às drogas foram praticamente inúteis. Aumentou o consumo consideravelmente e o crime organizado hoje tem na droga um eixo de sua ocupação. O que não quer dizer, por consequência, que nós não devamos assumir nossas responsabilidades e prestar atenção à questão da expansão da droga e das suas raízes nas nossas sociedades. Mas quer dizer que devemos reconhecer que ou nós adotamos uma política mais humana e mais orientada, através da saúde, para o bem-estar das pessoas, ou a guerra é puramente perdida, e pior do que perdida, ela recruta crescentemente pessoas à disposição das bandas de criminosos que infestam nossos países. Nós vimos na América Latina, não só no Brasil, que é hoje um grande consumidor de drogas, não é tão grande produtor, mas é um grande consumidor, mas nós vimos em outros países, como a Colômbia, como o México, o que aconteceu, e nós sabemos, já por experiência vivida na nossa região, de que a questão é séria e a ela nós devemos dedicar com coragem os nossos esforços. Dizer as coisas tais quais nós as sentimos. Nós sentimos que é preciso mudar a política. E há algum tempo, alguns países têm feito esforço no sentido de mudá-la. Aqui, nós temos ressaltado, e o nosso relatório insiste nesse ponto também, primeiro que se trata de uma questão que não se resolve nacionalmente, é global. Ela tem aspectos globais. Segundo, que as culturas locais têm seu peso. E no caso da América Latina isso é evidente. Na Bolívia, por exemplo, o cultivo da coca é tradicional. E é, muitas vezes, para fins medicinais. E não é o único país que assim procede. Então, a insistência em que se trata de uma questão internacional não deve nos cegar, impedir a nossa visão para percebermos que há aspectos que são locais, são culturais e que têm que ser respeitados. E, sobretudo, que essa antiga guerra contra as drogas deve mudar numa outra questão, na conversa continuada com as pessoas da sociedade. Sem a sociedade civil, os esforços dos governos são inúteis para mudar culturas. E se trata de mudar cultura. Termino dizendo uma coisa simples. No Brasil, durante muito tempo, houve uma luta feroz contra o uso do cigarro. Muito bem. A certa altura, houve uma discussão, Ruth Dreifuss participou dessa discussão, pela qual se viu que a proibição do cigarro não levaria a nenhum resultado. Não houve proibição do cigarro, do tabaco no Brasil, mas houve campanhas continuadas contra o charme que o tabaco poderia trazer nos filmes e coisas pelo estilo, e quanto ao abuso da utilização do tabaco em vários lugares públicos, como sendo restringidos. E se nós formos ver hoje a proporção das pessoas que fumam tabaco, caiu enormemente. Portanto, é possível, através de métodos que não são os da simples repressão e da guerra às drogas, uma política voltada para a saúde pública, para o bem-estar das pessoas, e, ao mesmo tempo, os governantes assumindo responsabilidade. Porque as sociedades percebem, as famílias, as pessoas, os indivíduos percebem que é necessário ter uma atitude mais clara de defesa da saúde, é por esse caminho que nós podemos avançar. É o que o nosso relatório propõe, modestamente, mas há muitos anos já essa comissão vem lutando e dizendo com franqueza, com sinceridade, embora esse último relatório seja um pouco mais técnico, o importante é a mensagem, e a nossa mensagem é esta: a regulamentação tem um efeito muito maior, muito mais positivo, sobretudo quando vem acompanhada da preocupação com a saúde humana, do que a repressão. Essa é a nossa mensagem. Muito obrigado.
Good afternoon. My name is Louise Arbour. I come from Canada, but I'm here in my personal capacity. I've been associated with this Global Commission on Drug Policies for many years, and I think, having worked myself in different capacities in the UN system, this is an area where I think we have to admit of a total failure of a now decade-old international system which purported to control harmful substances, but which policies actually have caused, in my opinion, more harm than the substance themselves. The work of the Commission is represented through many reports, and I would urge you to look back on some of our early reports, because this one that we are launching today is a more technical report, but its content, I think, are fundamental to the many issues related to the control of drugs, of narcotics, and psychotropic substances. There's two issues I would like to raise with you today to illustrate that a well-intentioned set of policies went very wrong along the way, with disastrous, if not actually deadly, consequences for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people actually. The first issue I would like to bring to your attention in relation to the failure, if not bankruptcy, of the international regime of control of drugs is its effect on access to essential medicines. And let me just maybe bring you back to the original intent of the international drug control system through the conventions that were referred to earlier. In both these conventions, the purpose is stated very clearly. The purpose is to strike a balance between the necessity to promote access to essential medicines, because many of these substances, even though we think they have harmful effects, also have tremendous medicinal effects. So the idea is to balance the necessity to promote access to essential medicines against, of course, the danger that they would be diverted to illicit, harmful usage. These are the two pillars, essentially, of this model. Over the years, and particularly, I think, starting in the 60s and 70s, the balance started to shift against access to essential medicine and very much in favor of a robust, repressive regime of attempting to prevent the illicit use of drugs. This imbalance has resulted in the fact that in the world today, so much emphasis is placed on the fear of diversion and abuse that it contributes to a very unequitable access to essential medicines. 75% of the world population today have no access to pain-relieving drugs. 92% of morphine is consumed by 17% of the global population, and you will not be surprised to find that these 17% of people are mostly in the global north. There are several causes for that, but one of the driving forces to create this very profound and dangerous inequality is the international drug control regime. As a result of the intense, I would say, obsession with preventing illicit use of drugs, this prohibition regime has contributed to an undersupply of controlled medicines in populations where they are restricted to such an extent that they become virtually unavailable for the important pain-relieving aspect that they contain, particularly in terminal cancer, patient treatment, anesthesia, and other forms of severe pain relief. This was obviously not an intended objective of the drug control regime, but it shows how it is so profoundly misconceived that it leads to these unintended but eminently foreseeable consequences. The second example that I'd like to bring to your attention that is, I think, very much linked to this obsession with a total prohibition model, which leaves very little room for more enlightened and responsible regulation of the consumption of narcotic drugs. And the example that I think is worth keeping in mind is the recent opioid crisis in North America, particularly in the United States. Now, this well-documented catastrophic epidemic, in a sense, which led to many preventable deaths, was caused in part by a broad expansion of opioids for pain relief in the 1990s in a market that was extremely poorly regulated, again as a result of a very long-standing absolute prohibition system. So throughout the early 1990s, unethical and very aggressive behavior by pharmaceuticals companies to boost the sales of their product, particularly of OxyContin, led to a wide availability of these drugs, while the promotion of these products totally downplayed the significance of their potential for creating dependence and ultimately addiction. The market was flooded, a market that was notoriously poorly regulated, with medical clinics very poorly regulated and supervised, and very lax drug prescription policies, as a result of which this oversupply, not surprisingly, flooded, as a consequence, also the illicit market. The illicit market is the one that fed addiction, in part, again, because the minute drugs are consumed in an unregulated, illegal environment, it's very difficult to obtain, for drug users, to obtain the kind of treatment, harm reduction, and treatment that they deserve. So while this market was flooded, the official government response, very much in line with the international repressive regime, was to try to cut supply. Well, this did absolutely nothing for people who needed medical assistance, and in particular, opioid substitution therapy, which is part of the harm reduction model that this Global Commission has been promoting since the beginning of its existence, such as methadone treatment and so on, rather than a policy of absolute prohibition and a promotion of abstinence as the sole appropriate answer to not only to drug use, but to drug abuse, which obviously is not producing any results. So, in conclusion, this report sits along a series of reports by the Commission in which we are promoting and advocating for the end of prohibition, to move to an evidence-based, responsible regulation model based on public health consideration, a model that will save lives rather than doubling down on an abusive system where consumption of substances is met only by repression to this day, to no success whatsoever. Thank you very much.
Very important work analyzing the situation
Chairperson, thank you very much. Let me join my colleagues for expressing our gratitude to the mayor for allowing us to use this splendid building as the place to launch our new report. As you have heard, the Global Commission on Drug Policy has been in existence for about 13 years. It actually came out of the concern and the action of the Latin American leaders who established a Latin America Commission on drug. And then from there, it was lifted to a global level with President Cardoso, if I remember, being the first chair. It was from there that the West African Commission on Drug was established, spearheaded by late Kofi Annan, and I was the chair of that commission. Now, that commission discovered, to our great surprise, that our lethargy, that look, we are not a producing region, we are not a consuming region. At the worst, we are a transit region. So why should we bother? And what we found was that we should bother. And the title of our report was Not Just in Transit. And that summed it all up, that we are not, drug is not just in transit in our region, it's gradually becoming a part of the menace of our region, and particularly we found the intertwining existence of terrorism, of violence, militancy, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and gun running, which was, we didn't realize this was there. The other thing we found, to our chagrin, was that politics in our region is now being encroached by drug money. Drug money is going into politics, and in fact, drug barons are also getting into politics. The military is being affected, the law enforcement are being affected. And then we made a number of recommendations. But one important recommendation, which brings us back to the Global Commission, is that it is not the war on drug has been fought for decades had not worked. We were able to establish that. But the dealing with the issue of drug is not to be isolated and dealt with in penny packets. It has to be a global action. It should not be dealt with in silos, even within regions. It has to be dealt with regionally. And there should be information, there should be working together. Now, that, of course, means that the idea that we had, that, look, and leave it to those who are producing in Latin America and in Asia, and leave them to it. Leave it to those who are consuming in Europe and North America, we are all to be active if we are going to deal with the issue of drug. And it is not a matter of war, it's a matter of a war or criminal justice issue. It's a matter of health and welfare and human rights of people. Now, that was what we found out, but let me now come and take a view from African perspective of our report that we are launching today, Classification of Psychoactive Substances when Science was Left Behind. And I want to take two substances which we in our part of the world use culturally, socially, as stimulant. One is khat, K-H-A-T. In many parts of Africa, particularly in East and Central Africa and Persian Gulf, you find people chewing khat. It's stimulant, it's refreshing, and it's social. It's psychoactive, but its psychoactive nature is nothing really compared with any of the substances that we have had, the one of alcohol. We haven't even mentioned the one of tobacco, which is more addictive than any of the substances that we talk about. Now, what then we found is that the WHO, after a very critical analysis, advised that there is nothing really dangerous in terms of addiction in khat plant by itself. The active ingredient in khat plant has been controlled from 1971 convention, but not khat plant, which you will see people chewing, whether they are in their country or in the diaspora. But in 2006, there was hue and cry about controlling khat plant, which the WHO has said it doesn't really cause any harm. But some countries in the north, in global north, decided to legislate control on khat plant. Now, this is not a substance that has any harmful effect in the sense that it needed to be controlled the way they have, except probably for anti-cultural nature or anti-immigrant sentiment that seem to be pervading in the north at the moment. The other point that I want to make is that we have in the West African area another substance which is also used as stimulant and which is social, cultural products that we chew is called kola nut. And it has, you see people even in their homes, anywhere, they chew it. Mild stimulant, I don't know, I was asking whether anybody has decided that this also should be controlled. I hope not, because there are many people who are living on growing kola nut and selling kola nut in our own society. So in the same way that many people live on planting cat plant and selling cat plant in East Africa and southern part of Africa. The other point I want to make when we talk about incoherent and inconsistent classification is the issue of Tramadol. Now, we had it being mentioned here. There is no painkiller that most of our people can have. The only one they have left is Tramadol. And because of the fear that our people have, some countries in Africa are now clamoring for scheduling Tramadol. WHO has said, look, they have advised many countries in Africa that this is not a substance to be scheduled, and yet they are asking for it to be scheduled. Now, if this is done, the only means or the only substance that is left that our people can get at for as painkiller is Tramadol. And in spite, as I said, in spite of the advice of WHO against scheduling it, some people are asking for it to be scheduled. So these two, the scheduling of what should not be scheduled, either because of the fear that it has substance that it doesn't really have, and the organization that could make definitive pronouncement on it, the WHO has made such pronouncement, and in spite of that, in the north, when catonine, which is really the active ingredient in cat, has been put under control, but not the cat plant. Cat plant now is also being put on control by national governments, which is really a pity. The second one, as I mentioned, is Tramadol, which is the only pain reliever that we can have access to. And if that is put on schedule, then the 75% we are talking about who are under, they have no pain relief substance to give them relief, that number will not be 75, it may even go up to 90%. So we believe that the incoherent and the inconsistent system that had handled classification of psychoactive substances should now be under a new review, and we should have a new regime of classification and based on scientific evidence. Thank you.
Ruth didn't want to introduce me because she thought I don't have enough time, so I've taken the liberty to come onto the dais. Well, first of all, I want to thank the Mayor of Portugal, Ferdinand Medina, and I want to recognize my community members, especially Luis Mendano, who have done excellent work, and of course, President Sampaio, who's taken the lead in this. It's great to be in a city which is so beautiful that you forget about the problems of drug use. But we really have to commend the lead taken by Portugal on the issue of decriminalization of drug use for personal use. And I want to congratulate Portugal for that. I come from India. I was born in Nairobi. I actually studied in England in the higher universities, undergraduate and postgraduate, but I then moved to India and started practicing law. I want to just tell you a story about why these laws which are imposed, why these irrational systems which are imposed are based on colonial cultural imperialism. Because in our country, we never had criminalization of sexual relations. So in our country, there were people who were transgender, who are hijras. And they are actually men castrated and dressed as women. So when the British saw that, they thought, what is this? They are neither men nor women. And they couldn't deal with it. And that's why they imposed a law in India first, which criminalized same-sex relationships. It was called unnatural sex. But in terms of drug use, it was slightly different. It was extensively available, all drugs, opium, cannabis, because these were culturally used. In our country, cannabis is used in a drink called bhang. And if you've ever gone to India, you get the best bhang in India, by the way, still today. And I'll tell you a story of my father-in-law, which I spoke at the UN General Assembly. He was a devout, religious Hindu man who would never touch tobacco, this, that, the other, no sins in the Hindu world. But he would always take bhang on the 2 days which was permitted in law and by custom and tradition. And I asked him out of curiosity, why did you do that? He said, I like these Indian sweetmeats, which are very sweet. And if I eat a lot of them, I get a problem with the stomach. But if I take bhang, I can eat as many as you want. And that shows its medicinal value. But the British, when they came to India, they saw all liberal use of medicines. In fact, the minister, when the law was introduced in 1980s in India, the Narcotics and Psychotropic Substances Act, he pleaded that the law should not be introduced. Why? He said in the state of Rajasthan, the desert region, they have a tradition even till today that if you go in the evening, instead of serving you a cup of tea, they will give you a small pellet of opium, hafim. They have never been addicted because that's the tradition. But once you start prohibiting, you get problems. And what are those problems? Those problems are not only limited to ill health, and ill health is a major problem. In fact, there's a very good argument that HIV spread was caused because of prohibition. Because from oral use of morphine, it went to injecting. Why? And that's a very big question. If I'm a drug user, I can tell you a story of all drug users in India and perhaps all over the world. If I start using opium or heroin, I become addicted to it. I stop having any relationship with my family, friends. I start stealing. It's a normal story. And what? Once I start doing that, I want to cut on prices. So from oral, it becomes injected. And there's a lot of literature on that. And in fact, the HIV epidemic was driven by this, by prohibition. Please appreciate that. But it's not only HIV which has been caused by the drug prohibitionist law. It's also hepatitis C. It is also TB. The largest epidemic today in the developing world, in India and South Africa, is no longer HIV, which is controllable. It is hepatitis C, which is actually curable, but no medicine is available because they're so expensive. Sofosbuvir is the most expensive medicine for treating communicable diseases. TB, again, it's spreading, and MDR TB, XDR TB. What is the other consequence? In India, it's the largest producer of generic drugs. You can get any drug you want. Even the drugs for pain killing are available, morphine, but no doctors are prescribing them. Because of the regulatory measures, they are afraid. And I can tell you that in buprenorphine substitution programs, doctors have been arrested, and there's a major issue whether they actually are liable criminally or not. These are the negative effects of prohibition. And this irrationality, which is the base, what was it based on? Well, you know, I can drink alcohol if I want. I can chew or smoke tobacco because it is done by the West. It's Christian to have drink, Last Supper, etc. But if you're chewing coca or if you're having cannabis, that's not part of our culture. So we will ban it. And it is that attitude, you know, get rid of it completely. It's not understanding human nature. It is not understanding a different culture. It doesn't understand what I call constitutional morality, which is based on the three principles of the French Revolution: equalité, liberté, fraternité, and dignity and privacy, which are the key constitutional principles. If somebody is smoking in their private room or having cannabis, what is wrong with it? They're not doing any harm. There's no basis of criminality. But it is done because of a cultural prejudice. And not only that, there is no scientific evidence. No scientific evidence, because in the 19th century, when the British came to India, they saw a huge opportunity to supply opium from India to China. And you know, there were 3 wars fought. The first, second, and the third opium war, with the British and some Indians also, who are big capitalists today, by the way, made huge amounts of money. What Marxists call primitive accumulation of capital. You get capital, and then you can run legal industries. But that time it was legal. But after the colonial regimes were over, they couldn't do that. And it was easy for them to change the laws because it no longer benefited them, and impose laws which are not in tune with the colonial setting at all. But just see, they imposed a law called 377 Indian Penal Code for same-sex relations. It took us 160 years, 20 years of fight, which I was fortunate to lead, to get rid of that same-sex law. Last year in September 2018. It will take another 10 years or 20 years for us to get rid of these conventions, because these conventions have no place in a society based on rationality and humanity and human rights. You cannot punish a person because he possesses cannabis or heroin of a particular quantity in India, because it is quantity based, and put him or her or transgender person in jail. And you know what the punishment is? 10 years minimum, if it's what is called commercial quantity. Is there a scientific basis for it? That is the purpose of this report. And it has to be done on a medically vetted system. Which is the organization which is most suited for that internationally? It is the WHO. But what is happening? It is the politics which governs. So the Commission on Narcotics Drugs, which is a politically motivated organization, if I may use that word, decides, and not scientists or medical people. But what is the harm caused? The harm is caused to the vast majority of who? Not the upper elite, the poor people. I have been unfortunate to see this in prison in the northern state of Punjab. People, and I'll stop here because I have a 5-minute guillotine. Poor people, rickshaw pullers, who take you on the rickshaw, they can't afford to have alcohol. It's more expensive to have alcohol than a small dose of cannabis. If they're caught, they're inside. And in India, it's not the pure quantity which is counted. If you mix it with something else, the total quantity is counted. So invariably, people are caught for commercial quantity and they're in, and if you're a poor person, you can't get bail because you have no access to lawyers. And I've seen in Punjab, 50% of the people waiting to get bail after 5 years because then it's automatic. That is the condition. Did Richard Nixon think about this when he thought about the war of drugs? He wasn't bothered because it was not the white man who was affected. The decision of those people, the US presidency, affected the vast majority of the poor and ethnically minority communities in the developing world. We want to get rid of, and I want to salute Portugal and Lisbon for taking up this fight and being an example, so that I hope Portugal can lead this, and we will certainly support it. Thank you very much.
We are coming to the last speech, and I try to be very brief because I want you also to have the opportunity to raise questions to the people on the stage and to my colleagues on the first row. But let me just summarize. Why did the Global Commission on Drug Policy decide to make a report on classification of psychoactive substances? For two reasons. One reason it is because it is the cornerstone of the system. I mean, it is because there is this list that there are substances that are prohibited with all the consequences that my colleague could bring with a very experience from different regions in the world. And the second reason is the following. If we achieve our goal, and our goal is regulating the psychoactive substances that are now illegal, we need also scientific evidence to know what are the harms and the benefits of these substances. Because if we achieve the aim of regulation, we have to know how severe the regulation has to be, or what it is exactly, what are the groups of population that should receive a special protection, what are the kind of consumption that is, for instance, not harmful for others, like tobacco. I mean, smoking in public, in places with other people, is harmful for the other people. What is the fact for certain of these substances? So we need to know what the substances are. And this is not the case in the current system. So we are both advocating for fundamental change, and we are also showing the distortion the classification system is bringing in the current system. So let me come to the conclusion of the report. There are three. We call the international community to recognize the incoherence and the inconsistencies of this classification system. And we want to have a critical review of this current model of classification. We call also the international community to prioritize the role of the World Health Organization and interdisciplinary scientific research in further developing evidence-based classification, scheduling criteria based on a rational scales of harms and benefits. And we call the UN member states to refocus the international scheduling system, but not only this, but to refocus the conventions in the original impetus. What was at the beginning was only the control of trade between different national systems in order to avoid that one nation can jeopardize the effort of another nation. We have to return to that and to allow the national responsible to choose the policy that is really needed. When Switzerland introduced some, at that time, pioneer treatments and harm reduction measures, I received the criticism of the control board of the conventions. And they came several times to speak and to ask Switzerland not to do some things. And I always said, okay, Switzerland will collaborate with the whole world and better collaborate in the future against money laundering, against corruption, where we had some things to better in the legislation on banking in Switzerland, but the responsibility for the health of our people is in my government. It is not in Vienna. So these are our recommendations. You will also find in the report, and I will not read now this criteria, we are proposing the criteria that will be needed on one side to make the system now less inconsistent, but mainly also to inspire the countries on the way of regulating the substances in order to really respond to the harms, but also to accept the benefits of these different substances. So now we have, and I regret that we have only 20 minutes, more or less, to take questions and remarks. You can address them to my colleagues here on the stage or to my colleagues sitting in the first row. So I want the micro to be able to circulate and ask who will be the first, qui va rompre la glace, as we say in French. Nobody wants to rompre la glace? How do you say that?
Romper o gelo.
Romper o gel. Here there is a question and the mic is coming.
Hello to all. I am Portuguese and I am the founder of one association that represents the consumers of cannabis mainly. It's an honor to be here with such personalities. I wanted to make a question and to ask on how is your what are the concerns regarding the new channels of selling drugs that are mainly online through untraceable platforms, and how are these new ways of illicit drug market behavior being addressed on new policies for this matter? Thank you.
Well, let me perhaps just answer in very general terms that this explosion now of the black market on electronic means is one more consequence of the prohibition. And it is not only the substances that are sold, but the whole blockchain system that should make it invisible to the authorities. And it is just, I would say, the consequence that you have to be hidden, but it is also the consequence that the police is not able to enforce the law. So if you accept this answer, which is not a technical one, but a political one, and we are fighting against the prohibition because one of the effects of the prohibition is the effect you are bringing to this audience.
Alô, muito boa tarde. Gostaria de colocar uma questão. Não há tráfico de droga o grande tráfico de droga sem apoio do grande capital, sem ter bancos ou financeiras por trás. Eu gostaria de saber quais são as propostas que têm para o controle do capital financeiro no tráfico de droga. Muito obrigado.
É uma questão muito delicada. Na verdade, o uso do dinheiro sujo, dinheiro negro, hoje está sendo combatido por muitas razões. Essa é uma, mas há outras, que é a corrupção. E os bancos são obrigados, cada vez mais, a informar. E a mesma tecnologia que permite, na pergunta anterior, a sobrevivência de certas drogas à margem da lei, também vale para esse caso. Tem que haver um esforço crescente com tecnologias capazes de, realmente, nós temos acesso a essas transferências de dinheiro. Ninguém pode ter ilusão de que não vão existir novas formas. O ser humano tem imaginação, criará novas formas, mas certamente o ponto principal que nós estamos insistindo aqui é que mais vale regulamentar do que reprimir. Esse é o ponto. Isso, no caso da sua pergunta, requer maior regulamentação do sistema financeiro.
Other questions? Madame, here in the second row.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very stimulating and interesting discussion. Mr. Grover, you mentioned that you felt it would take 10 to 20 years in order for the changes necessary to happen. But when you look at such a big goal as the one you're envisaging, there's often small steps that are necessary in order to get there. So where would you start? What first small step would you recommend?
Well, I use that in a rhetorical sense. Don't take 20 years or 10 years in the sense. The point I was trying to make, and I think there are better people, the commissioners here, who can answer that more fruitfully. But I think the breaches are already being made. The fact that Portugal has actually come up with the decriminalization of personal possession is a breach. Switzerland, it's happening now, a number of places where questions are being raised. The United States, states picking up cannabis, legalizing cannabis. The country which started the war on drugs itself is collapsing under its own order. That's an indication that things will not actually be the same. There are other people who are protagonists for that goal, but I think the breaches are coming up, and they will become more and more apparent because young people who actually see this. Well, I'm not talking the Clinton generation, which smoked but did not inhale. I was the one who smoked and inhaled when I was his age, when he was in England. But those people see the hypocrisy. So they see the hypocrisy of this, and I think once, you can never tell when things will collapse. I use the very famous talk of Lenin. He never knew when the revolution would come, but it came. Okay? I similarly did not know when our same-sex law would change, but it came but after 20 years. But we don't know. We have to keep on battling, and things breach over a period of time. And we should never give up. The lesson I would say is, if you feel your fight is right, as the Portugal example shows, you keep on fighting until you win. And you shall win, even this battle.
Thank you. May I just add, the Global Commission is very clear. We have a program with 5 steps. And the priority number 1, I would say, is to the survival and the good health, the safety and the security of the population. So that means treatment for those who are in need, which is not the case for all the people consuming drugs, and harm reduction. That's just the basis, because if you don't save the life of the people, what can you do more? And the second is clearly decriminalization. The criminalization is an obstacle to the access to treatment, is an obstacle for measures that save life, but it is also destroying lives when you are in jail, when you are a young person with a criminal record, and so on. And the third is regulation. And I think the world is advancing in different places for different aspects of this program. But, and each country has to find really what is now the priority and the next step to do. But for me, clearly, decriminalization is the next step, and then we learn from cannabis markets, and we think about one product after the other, how to take control over them. Questions, remarks? Madam?
Okay, I'm Magda Ferreira, and I want to put a question about when we talk about regulation, and I question about the power of the pharmaceutical lobby in that regulation. As a simple example, what happened in Portugal about cannabis was regulated, the medical cannabis, a few months ago. And I believe it's kind of hypocritical to left the youngs to go to the underworld to buy their recreational cannabis. I have a 19-year-old son, and I think it's not fair. I think the pharmaceutical lobby is just thinking about the numbers and not thinking about the people. And when we talk about regulation, we have to be very much aware of how it is going to happen. I don't have knowledge at all to understand this, but I do understand that if we don't pay attention, we will give even more power to that lobby in the process of regulation of substances.
Thank you. I think President Zedillo would like to answer such a question. He is an economist and knows very well about regulated and irregulated markets.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think that once you accept the principle that prohibition is wrong and has been a disaster, a human disaster, and I could give you figures of what has happened in my country, but I don't want anybody to start crying here, because I will get at least one person to cry if you know about the Mexican tragedy. But the point is that once you accept the principle that prohibition is wrong, that what you have to do is the 3 steps that were mentioned by Ruth, then it follows that it is not only about marijuana, it is about everything where you have to apply the 3 principles. And of course this is not easy, but it has to be done. And of course you require institutional capacity, you require your medical system to work on it, and of course you need to have intelligent regulation. The same place, or for the same reason that you don't want to have monopolies controlling things that go against the interest of the people, you don't want businesses to take advantage of this opportunity to make more money in detriment both of the health of the people and the economy of the people. So I would say, yes, what has happened in Portugal is amazing, and I remember our early conversations with President Sampaio. I remember the very first conversation with President Sampaio and Prime Minister Guterres in Valparaíso, Chile, when they first expressed to me that they had a very clear idea that things had to change in Portugal, and they started that, and they did that. But I will tell today with great respect, you started this, you have to continue the road so that you don't have the kind of injustices and risks that you are mentioning. Because if you accept the principle, you have to do it all the way.
Merci. We are here, the guest of the mayor of Lisbon, and we are very grateful. we have this room, this beautiful archive, until 6:30, so I wouldn't exaggerate the occupation of this venue. I think I could take 2 questions, short questions together, and then let one of the colleagues answer, and then we will have to finish. If it is really needed, we can continue on the place, which is also beautiful. Okay, so yes, Mr. Ambassador, the Ambassador of Switzerland.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam President, dear members of the Commission. Thank you very much for this very enriching and very interesting dialogue. You're working since 7-8 years in this Commission. Do you already have a feedback, or can you tell us something about the acceptance of your theories, which are completely new? What about the international organization? Are they working in that sense, or the governments? Thank you very much.
Thank you. The second question, and we will answer both. Yeah, here there is a question or a remark.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My question, I think, is in terms of follow-up on the previous question. It has to do, in the sense, with the growing difficulty in communicating. I think we face a challenge as decision makers. I'm a member of parliament, and the difficulty in reaching out to the general public and ensuring that science-based decisions are made and that science is valued in the first line is a growing difficulty in political systems all over. And because your conclusions are, to a sense, and our conclusions in our work, to a sense, are counterintuitive towards common sense, a great challenge in an age where populism is rising is how do we communicate, not only to the level of international organizations, but to the general public, that these measures, in fact, make more sense than what common sense would tell you. And we're in a country that for 20 years has had a radical strategy that is working, and many people still are hesitant in accepting the next steps and in moving forward in the very sense that we've been doing with success over the past few years. I know it's a difficult question, but how do we ensure that the debate and that in terms of communication, we make sure that science prevails over prejudice and over, non-fact-based common sense? Thank you.
Thank you. Very briefly, I would say what we were able to do in Portugal, in Switzerland, in other countries, was in a situation of emergency. We saw the people dying, we saw the contamination through viruses, and we had to act. The emotion of the public was also on a very high level, their concern, their mourning for the people who died by overdoses. So it was, I would say, quite easy to make the first step, the step bringing public health in the center. But now, the people are perhaps no longer so concerned by the issue. So now we need something else. We need not a call to emotion, we need a call to rationality. We need a call that, like the call we are launching today, that the system itself is inconsistent and has to be replaced. President Santos would like to take the floor also, and if necessary, the 2 persons here who had a great experience of the international system, Helen or Louise, will answer the ambassador.
No, I think the 2 questions go to the root of the most important challenge that we have right now. It's the discussion that we are having around many issues. Climate change is one of them. How do you convince the people who do not believe in climate change that this is a real threat? I, in my country, suffered this dilemma between emotions and arguments. The emotions are taking over the arguments. Emotions are taking over science, and the big challenge is to revert this and make the science the most powerful argument. and you have to persevere. I give you an example. In my country, the people who are against this policy accuse me and accuse the Commission and accuse this cause as wanting to poison the young people in the parks. And this is a very powerful and sensitive argument politically. It is very easy to manipulate this argument politically. How can you counteract that? Well, by persevering with arguments that are equally or more powerful. And once you start explaining that prohibition is causing more deaths, that prohibition is causing more corruption, that prohibition is causing, in the end, more addiction, because the criminal organizations, what they're doing to expand their markets is to induce the young kids into drugs and convince the mothers that this argument is more powerful than the emotional argument that politicians use. Then we'll start winning this battle for public opinion. But it's not easy. It's not easy because a hard line attitude towards drugs has been very popular in the elections and in the political arena. But we must persevere to try to change this and make the people who are for prohibition become on the defensive, not on the offensive. And this is one of our big challenges that we have now, and the media can help us a lot in this venture.
Thank you. Okay. I don't know. Yes, this works. I think President Santos has made the case very clearly that we live in an era where the competition between rationality and emotion, or let's put it between science and prejudice, is very intense in every respect. And this is an area where it's particularly challenging to overcome stereotypes, established opinions that people have on this subject. So two things. First, I think we need, in every country, the situation is different. We need to privilege a forum in which rationality still has its place with public confidence and public trust associated with it. In some cases, it could be the press. In other cases, it could be Parliament. Certainly in Canada, it's been the courts. I think it's fair to say that the courts have, quite recently, for instance, the courts overruled government policies that were trying to push back on harm reduction strategies, the opening of safe injection sites and so on, to try to promote a public interest. So this was an area where the political will was going in the right direction at some levels, and then at others went the other way. The courts were an environment in which the issue could be debated rationally, and it is an institution that enjoys a lot of public trust. So I think we need to choose our venues. At the international level, it is very problematic. I have worked in the UN, in particular in the human rights system. In the human rights system, internationally, I don't think we could today enact documents as admirable as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. All the great normative human rights infrastructure is in place. The challenge, of course, is to make it come alive and to have it applicable. In this field, it's the normative infrastructure that is at fault. And that's going to be very challenging to reverse. It's hard enough to implement a good document, but to resist the implementation of a bad one, such as the framework for the control of narcotic drugs, I think is an immense challenge, and it's only going to come from mobilization inside member states and cooperative, like-minded regional or like-minded associations of member states to push against not only the inertia, but the continued expansion of policies that are going in the wrong direction. So I don't underestimate that challenge.
Well, President Lagos.
I would like to add one step further where you leave the floor. In today's world, there is no question that there are many problems that are beyond national borders. And this is one of those issues that is beyond national borders. This is one of those issues where it's going to be extremely difficult to solve unless there is some conviction that it's not possible to solve the narco-traffickers and drug dealers unless everybody understands a similar view. This is very much like climate change, which is another area where unless everybody understands that the life on the planet is in danger, not the planet, but the human life in this planet is in danger. The planet has been existed for 5,000 million years, okay? But human beings here, or Homo sapiens here, only 70,000 years, nothing in the history of the planet. So, are we going to agree? Because science is saying what is going on. That is, the planet is warming. Then life as we know, human life as we know, will not exist. If this is so, the problem is that in many cases, big powers used to think this is a domestic policy issue. You have nothing to tell me, sir. As long as it's a domestic policy issue, we are lost, because this is not true. This is an international policy issue, and we have to understand what are the facts. And what these reports represent are facts. And if these facts is what science is telling us, then it's a moment of action. And then the problem is that in the world as we knew it before, is quite different of what we have now. Because now citizens are much more informed. Now, because in the digital age, it's a different way to understand to each other. And therefore, I hope that if there are many meetings like this one here, with regard to this particular issue, then it's going to be possible to think a better world. But let's say very clear, these are international problems that are not going to be solved by each particular country, no matter how important are those countries. The other way to say is that also, if those very important countries are not going to agree, things are going to be much more difficult to solve. When they tell you this is a domestic policy issue, you have to tell them, no, sir. All of us, 7 billion people are living in this planet, and we wanted to continue living in this planet. And narco-traffickers are against that. And this is an international problem. And that is why this Global Commission has so many people around from different parts of the world, and to stand up in this commission means, okay, now let's go into have action. And to understand that this is an international problem beyond the borders of each of our own countries. And to say here in Europe, where you have been able to think beyond national borders, we hope it's a little bit easier than in some other parts of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for adding really this element. The fight against the criminal organization is an international challenge because these organizations are multinational. but to take care of the safety and the health of the people is a responsibility of each government. And this is really also linked with the choice they will do in drug policy for their population. And I repeat, priority to public health, decriminalization, and regulation of the drugs. This is our message. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the questions. I have to finish here this meeting. It's not easy because we could discuss longer, but I wish you a very nice evening. Thank you also for the welcoming of the nice city of Lisbon.